Robert Duvall was picking up a prescription in rural Virginia when he heard the pharmacist tell an elderly man the cost of his medication. He watched the man do the math, the specific private arithmetic of someone calculating what they can and cannot afford, and arrive at an answer that was clearly wrong for him. What Duvall did before the man could speak took 30 seconds and required no introduction. It was a Thursday afternoon in November 2008, and the pharmacy on the main road through Sperryville, Virginia, was the kind of small-town operation that has survived the arrival of the chain pharmacies in the county seat by being closer and knowing its customers. 3 aisles, a counter at the back, a pharmacist named Claire Holt, who had been filling prescriptions in this building for 17 years and who knew most of her customers by name and medication. The waiting area had 4 chairs. 2 of them were occupied. Duvall had been coming to this pharmacy for years, not for anything dramatic, the routine prescriptions of a man in his late 70s who attended to the maintenance of his health with the same practical, unromantic attitude he brought to the maintenance of his farm. Claire Holt knew his order and his timing and the particular quality of his Thursday afternoon visits, which were quiet and efficient and never required more of her than the transaction asked for, not for anything dramatic, the ordinary maintenance prescriptions of a man in his late 70s. And Claire Holt knew his order and his usual Thursday afternoon timing with the easy familiarity of someone who has been providing a service to the same person for a long time. He had arrived at 3:15, been told his prescription would be ready in 10 minutes, and had taken one of the waiting chairs with a small notebook he had been carrying for 2 weeks, and had not yet found the right conditions to write in. The elderly man was already at the counter when Duvall arrived. He had his back to the waiting area. A lean, slightly stooped figure in work clothes, a jacket that had been good once and was still serviceable. The particular posture of someone who does not think about how they stand because they have spent a long time standing in the way that work requires, rather than the way comfort does. His name was Leonard Pruitt. He was 79 years old, had lived in Rappahannock County his entire life, and had been a regular at this pharmacy for as long as Claire Holt had been working in it, long enough that she knew his medications and his insurance situation, and, by this particular Thursday in November, understood before she ran the card that something had changed. His supplemental insurance had lapsed in October. He had not mentioned this to anyone because there was no one to mention it to who could do anything about it, and Leonard Pruitt was not someone who mentioned things he couldn't change. The prescription was for a blood pressure medication he had been taking for 6 years. The same medication, the same dosage, the same 30-day supply that had become as unremarkable a part of his routine as coffee in the morning or the news on the radio at 7. He drove to the pharmacy on the first Thursday of the month. He picked it up. He drove home. This had been the pattern for 6 years, and he had not thought about it particularly until the morning he had opened the letter from his supplemental insurer and read the word that meant the pattern was about to change. The cost without supplemental coverage was $87 for a 30-day supply. Claire Holt told him the number in the quiet, careful way of someone delivering information she knows is going to land badly and who wants to deliver it with as much dignity as the situation permits. Leonard Pruitt heard the number. He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of surprise. He had suspected something like this, had done some version of this calculation in his kitchen that morning before he drove over. It was the quiet of a man confirming a number he had hoped would be different, and finding it was not. Duvall, in the waiting chair 6 feet away, had heard the number. He had also heard what came before it, the slight pause in Claire's voice that was not quite a hesitation, but was adjacent to one, the pause of someone who has run a transaction they were expecting to go one way and has found it going another. He had heard this, and looked up from the notebook without appearing to look up, in the way he had been doing this kind of observing for 50 years. He was not watching, obviously. He had the notebook open and was holding a pen with the posture of someone about to write something down. But the pen had not moved in the 2 minutes since Leonard Pruitt arrived at the counter, and his attention, which was peripheral but complete, had been on the man at the counter since the conversation began. He watched Leonard Pruitt do the math. The math took approximately 4 seconds. It was visible not in any movement or expression that most people would have caught, but in the specific quality of stillness that settles over a person when they are running numbers inside their own head, a concentration that is brief involuntary, and entirely honest. Duvall had been watching people do things for 50 years. He recognized the math. He recognized the answer, too. The answer was a version of not today, a deferral that was not a decision so much as an acknowledgement of arithmetic, the specific resignation of someone who has done the calculation and knows that the result is not in their favor and that there is nothing to argue with, because the numbers are what they are. Leonard opened his mouth to speak. Duvall stood up from the waiting chair. He crossed the 6 feet to the counter in 4 steps in the unhurried way he crossed most distances, as if the destination were already reached and the steps were a formality. He did not look at Leonard Pruitt as he crossed. He did not look at the waiting area to see if anyone was watching. He simply moved to the counter as if he had been intending to do so all along, which was not true, but which produced in the room the impression of something ordinary rather than something deliberate, standing beside Leonard Pruitt without addressing him, looking at Claire Holt. "I'll cover it," he said. He said it in the same plain, matter-of-fact voice he used for most things, the voice of someone stating a fact rather than making a gesture. Claire Holt looked at him, then at Leonard, then back at Duvall. Leonard Pruitt turned. "I don't need," he started. "I know," Duvall said. He was already reaching for his wallet. "This is just the prescription." There was a moment, the specific moment that arrives when someone is deciding whether to accept an unexpected offer or deflect it, and when the deflection is the socially easier path and the acceptance is the honest one. Leonard Pruitt stood at the pharmacy counter and looked at Robert Duvall, who was not looking back at him because he was focused on the transaction with Claire Holt and was treating the matter as settled. It took Leonard approximately 5 seconds to let it be settled. 5 seconds of the specific internal negotiation between the part of a person that resists being helped and the part that recognizes when resistance is the wrong response. The resistance lost. It usually does when the help is offered in the right way, which is without theater and without the expectation of gratitude beyond what the moment naturally produces. "Thank you," he said. He said it in the direct, unadorned way of someone who means a thing and does not need to decorate it. "Don't mention it," Duvall said. He paid for Leonard's prescription and his own. He sat back down in the waiting chair. Leonard Pruitt waited for his bag at the end of the counter, received it from Claire, and walked toward the door. At the door, he turned. "You look familiar," he said, in the slightly puzzled way of someone who has been too preoccupied with their own situation to look closely at the people around them and is only now doing it. "I have one of those faces," Duvall said. Leonard nodded. He was the kind of man who, when an answer does not satisfy him completely, stores it without comment and lets time decide whether it matters. Most things, in his experience, didn't. He let this one sit with the others and went out through the pharmacy door into the November afternoon, which was cold in the particular way of late November in the foothills, the cold that has stopped being seasonal and started being the new condition of the world for the next several months. He went out. Claire Holt watched him go. Then she looked at Duvall in the waiting chair, who had returned to his notebook and was writing something in it with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who has found the right conditions after all. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said, and Claire Holt had been working behind a pharmacy counter for 17 years and had developed, over those 17 years, an accurate sense of which moments required comment and which were complete as they were. She filled the rest of her prescriptions. She did not mention what had happened to her colleague who came on at 4, or to the 2 customers who came in after Duvall left, or to anyone she spoke to that evening. It was not a secret she was keeping so much as a thing that belonged to the afternoon and to the people in it, and that felt diminished by translation into the kind of story you tell someone over dinner. She had seen things behind that counter for 17 years. Some of them she kept. She filled the rest of her prescriptions. Duvall collected his when it was ready, said goodbye to Claire in the ordinary way, and drove back to the farm on Route 211 through the November afternoon. Leonard Pruitt went home, put his medication in the cabinet above the kitchen sink where he kept his prescriptions, and made himself dinner. He had told no one about the insurance lapsing because there was no one to tell who could do anything about it, and the man at the counter had handled it so quickly and so quietly that it still felt, an hour later, as if it had barely happened. He thought about the man occasionally over the following days, not obsessively, not with any particular weight, but in the idle way that small events surface in the mind when the day is quiet and there is no urgent thing demanding attention. He could not have said why this one surfaced more than others. Perhaps because it had been so quick. Perhaps because the man had not looked at him the way people usually looked at you when you did something for them, with the expression that says you have created an obligation, but had simply said thank you and meant it, and moved on. He did not know who the man was. His daughter, who lived 40 miles away and called on Sunday evenings, found out 3 weeks later when she came for Thanksgiving, and Leonard mentioned in passing that someone at the pharmacy had covered his prescription because his insurance had lapsed. She asked who. Leonard described him. His daughter was 44 years old and had a better memory for faces than her father did. She looked up the name that came to mind. She sat at her father's kitchen table on the Thursday after Thanksgiving and showed him the phone. Leonard Pruitt looked at the screen for a moment. "Huh," he said. It was not an eloquent response. It was the response of a 79-year-old man who has just received a piece of information that recontextualizes a small part of a Thursday afternoon, and who is processing it in the quiet, unhurried way of someone who is not easily impressed, but who is occasionally surprised. He looked at his daughter. "Nice man," he said. He said it in the same tone he used for most of his assessments, direct, specific, finished. He was not a man who inflated things. He had driven to the pharmacy, a man had paid for his prescription, and the man had a familiar face that turned out to belong to someone his daughter recognized. These were the facts. They were sufficient. His daughter laughed. She told the story at Thanksgiving for the next several years, which meant that a modest number of people in Rappahannock County heard it, not widely, not publicly, but in the way that stories circulate in small communities through family and Sunday dinners and the occasional conversation at the feed supply. His daughter sorted his things over the weeks after the funeral, in the careful, deliberate way of someone who is doing a task that needs doing and who is giving it the attention it deserves, rather than the speed that grief sometimes pushes you toward. She found the medications in the cabinet above the kitchen sink, arranged in the order Leonard had kept them for years. The blood pressure medication was there, the current month's supply nearly full. She stood in her father's kitchen for a while. Leonard Pruitt died in 2014 at 85. He had taken his blood pressure medication every day for the last 6 years of his life, without interruption. His daughter still tells the story at Thanksgiving. She ends it the same way every year. "Daddy said, 'Nice man.'" She pauses here, every time in the same place. That was it. That was the whole review. 79 years old, a stranger had just paid for his prescription, and that was the full extent of his commentary. Another pause. I think about that a lot. About how some people just receive a thing and say, "Thank you," and mean it, and move on. He was like that his whole life. That's probably why it worked. The way it was given matched the way he received it. Neither of them made anything of it. It just happened, and then it was done. If this story reminded you that the most important interventions are the ones that happen before anyone has to ask, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. More stories about who Robert Duvall really was in the moments nobody planned are coming every single week.